Edward the Blue Engine had been retired from banking duties on Gordon's Hill. Both he and the Fat Controller conceded that Edward was now old and needed to lighten his workload. The occasion was marked with Edward banking an enthusiast train for the final time up the hill. The enthusiasts came to thank Edward. They were known as the Sodor Locomotive Society, or SLS for short. They had wanted to operate an engine of their own on the railway and had made countless offers to buy one of the Fat Controller's engines, especially Edward. Of course, the Fat Controller always declined. But one day, the society managed to purchase an engine from a heritage railway on the mainland. They had overhauled it and wished to offer their engine services as the new banker for Gordon's Hill. A trial was agreed. Edward and Boko awaited the arrival of the new engine. The engine had no name, only a number. 16. "Welcome to the railway," greeted Edward. 16 just stared. "All right." "Well, no time like the present. You'll be shunting the yards, getting used to your surroundings before banking the afternoon freight." 16 snorted. Away, man. I've spent most of my life pushing trucks around. I'm not doing that again, Lake." "Well, that's why you're here," replied Boko crossly. "I cannot do it, man. I've earned the right to be pulling passengers, Lake." "Very well, 16. If that's the case, you can pull my trains while I do your work," said Edward calmly. 16 was thrilled and hurried away before anyone said anything else. Boko was in disbelief. "16 was puffing happily down the line with the coaches. But the coaches weren't happy, and neither were the passengers. 16 was a rough rider. Stop complaining, pet. I'm just a bit out of practice is all," he sneered. As Edward shunted the yards, Thomas arrived. "What are you doing here?" asked Thomas. "Standing in for 16. He didn't want to do the job he's been brought here to do," sighed Edward. "What does he look like?" "As far as I can tell, he looks identical to Wilbert, who visited all those years ago." Thomas thought for a moment, and then gasped. "So he's here! Wilbert told me and Toby a story all about him. He had an accident after ignoring a danger sign. He's a troublemaker." "Ignoring a danger sign," smiled Edward. "Remind you of anyone?" Thomas felt a little embarrassed. "Industrial engines can be temperamental, I know that. But they have also lived very hard lives. I'll keep my eye on 16, don't you worry, Thomas." "So why have you let him get away with not banking trains then?" puffed Thomas. Grinned Edward. "That's the beauty of being old. You can pick your battles." Thomas smiled knowingly. Meanwhile, 16 was resting in the yards near Brendam. Bill and Ben puffed into the yards. They were pleased to meet 16 at first, for he looked similar to them. But when 16 told them how he'd spoken to Edward, their mood quickly changed. The old fella didn't put up much of a fight. You should treat Edward with more respect," snapped Bill. "He's worked on this railway for years and knows more about being useful than you will ever know," grunted Ben. "He is kind, reliable, and very helpful. You wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for Edward." "Howie, I'm not listening to this drivel, Lake." "That's enough, you three," exclaimed Boko. 16, you're to return to Wellsworth immediately." "Softies," 16 hissed. When 16 arrived at Wellsworth, Edward was nowhere to be seen. Just then Henry steamed past with a long, heavy goods train. A few minutes later, there came a call. "Henry is stuck on Gordon's Hill," said the signalman. "The banker must be sent at once." "I'm not going up there, like." "Yes, you are," grumbled his driver. "Now come on." 16 was forced up the line and reluctantly made his way to the rescue. When he arrived at the bottom of the hill, Henry was eager to get moving again. "Are you ready?" he called. "Aye," came the feeble reply. Henry set off. He pulled as hard as he could. It quickly dawned upon him that he was pulling the whole weight of the train. "Come on," cried Henry, "you're not even trying." "Oh man, it's not for me, this lake." And 16 gave up. Henry was appalled by all of this. "Despicable," he grunted. 16 puffed alongside. "Sus mate," he called. He was just about to leave when he was interrupted by a familiar whistle. "Edward! Are you ready, Henry?" "Ha! You ain't gonna manage that, you gudgy. Just watch." "Give over, man." When the train reached the top, Henry whistled and Edward responded triumphantly. He watched as the train disappeared out of sight. 16 suddenly felt very ashamed. That evening, the VAT controller came to speak to 16 along with the society. He was not amused. "As far as I am aware, this trial has proven unsuccessful. I have no choice but to decline the Society's offer as using you as banker. You've displayed a severe lack of responsibility when compared to a fine engine such as Edward." "We're very disappointed in you, 16, said a Society member. "I guess it's back to the Heritage Railway for you now." "Oh, divin' do that, please. I was sat on them sidings for years waiting for someone to fix his leg. Oh, I promise I'll graft. I'll give us another chance, sir, please. Edward can show us what to do like," pleaded 16. The VAT controller turned to Edward. "He acts the age of his number," said Edward firmly. "But I can see the potential for a really useful engine." The VAT controller pondered for a moment, then simply said, "You have a lot to prove." He turned and walked away. "Oh, hey, thanks, Edward," said 16 quietly. "Oh, that was canny good of you, man. Seeing you with that train made me realise you're not such a pushover, like." "Thank you, 16, replied Edward. "I'll take that as a compliment." "16 worked hard as the new banker. His strength proved invaluable for the duty. Under Edward's guidance, 16 became a reliable asset to the railway. He eventually won over the other engines, who he now sees as friends. He is still rough and can be very abrupt, but that's just who 16 is. And after months of hard work and a favourable word from Edward, 16 is now able to hold trains along the branch line in between banking duties. Now who would have thought it?